Hello, I'm Tyler Riley, TDF's Digital and Performance Manager. Today I will be moderating a conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Joining me today are Chloe Beck, Christina Alexander, and Bliss Griffin. Again, I'm Tyler Riley. I'm a black male wearing glasses and a burnt sienna sweater in front of a gray wall. And I am here on the traditional land of the Munsee Lenape people. And I'll turn it over to Chloe to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Beck, she, her. I'm a Black female woman with a blue baseball cap with a Michelle Obama image on it, as well as a blue shirt with horizontal stripes with white. And I am behind a glass mirror. And I am currently on the Mohican territory. I'm in upstate New York currently.
And next, Christina Alexander.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Christina Alexander, she, her. I'm a Black female. I have long, multicolored hair, and I'm wearing large brown glasses, designed gray dress with a white background that's got some pictures behind it.
And Bliss Griffin.
Hi, friends and colleagues. As Tyler said, my name is Bliss Griffin. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Black woman in a room with gray walls, terracotta curtains behind me. My hair is in a high curly ponytail, which I like to call the pineapple. And I am in the unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape, which we know under colonialism as New York City.
Thank you all. And again, in that same order, I'll kick it off with our first question or prompt. If each of you could tell us about your position and what your day-to-day duties more or less are.
Okay, I work for Moulin Rouge, the musical, and my title is the Director for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And to be fully transparent, no 2 days are the same. Something that I would like to note is I sit in a seat worldwide, so I also liaise between our London company, our Australia company, and now the tour. And majority of my time is a lot of meeting and trying to navigate time zones, which I'm still new at. And it's spending a lot of time trying to foreshadow types of trainings and professional development. Something that I'm excited about right now is trying to enjoy the moving target, which is the tour, and finding ways to still build in EDI opportunities as they move around different states, especially some of those that are not as welcoming coming forward in some of our tour locations. And I'm also spending a lot of time working with the Australian and London companies trying to find EDI professionals who are local, who really understand some of the issues that are happening, so I can kind of look at it from my lens and try to help get the correct people in there to start training some of our company members.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thanks, Chloe. I think that this is something that you're going to hear often in our conversation today. Our work is just so darn diverse. I am the Director of Social Responsibility at the musical Wicked. I cover lots of territory, similar to Chloe. So there are lots of different people that I am working with. And that means that every day is something different in fun ways, ideally. It's a really broad scope. Emails and trainings and meetings, but also some really great time to do some sort of think tank things. How do we dream what our industry can be, but how do we dream ways that we can, from myself personally, my experience is a lot of community-based building work. So I think a lot about how do we really sew into this community at Wicked? What are the things that we can be doing so that everybody understands what a community actually is? And what are the ways that we can really, really embed this idea in from the time you walk into the room to the time you leave the room. So different things, different days. How can we do things better? The other fun part of my job in particular is that I also have a human resources lens to the work that I do on top of everything else. So it's very varied. And I think for people with big, busy brains, it's a really fun space to be in because who knows which cylinder needs to be firing, or they all may be at the same time.
Well, so I am the National Diversity and Inclusion Strategist at the Actors Equity Association. We are the union that represents over 50,000 stage actors and stage managers. So again, I mean, you're going to hear it a million times. The scope is broad. I think of myself as an internal consultant facing three major areas, right? So I face employers by helping them to sometimes build strategy to make their spaces more diverse and inclusive. Very often I face members by helping them to understand what equal employment opportunity, what harassment and discrimination, what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging look like in their workplaces. But I'd say the lion's share of my time is spent facing the organization itself, working with every department herein to help Actors Equity figure out what it needs to change in policy, practice, mindset, to really meet its goal of becoming an anti-racist organization. So that is it's kind of a thrilling exploration because we're always digging down to the root to see, why do we have this? What was the mindset that established this? And how can we be thinking differently and strategically to move in the direction that we want? And how can we implement these things so that they don't depend on my being here or whoever the next diversity department lead is being there to maintain themselves? So.
Wow. Yeah. That all sounds incredible and extremely daunting. What inspired you all to become involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion? Was there any specific type of training that you had to undergo to enter this field?
For me, I always say my lived experience was my ultimate training. You know, I identify as a Black gay woman, and I grew up in a low SES. I grew up in the projects of Cleveland, Ohio, so I understood inequity and lack of diversity and inclusion very early on in my life. But I would say my first window into it from a professional standpoint might have been my freshman year of college. I instantly joined something called the Social Justice Task Force because I saw them doing things like tunnels of oppression and really educating us on, you know, some things that were my actual history that I didn't learn pre-K through 12. And my passion for that, I really saw my voice move and I saw my ideas come to light, and I got to see diversity, equity, and inclusion from a place of celebration and not always this oppressive space. And from there, I thought I would go to school to be Wendy Williams Jr., but I got bit by the student affairs bug. And for the last 10 years, I've worked on some of the most premier college campuses, my most recent being New York University. And before that, the University of Georgia, Go Dogs. And in that work professionally, we're in training after training, facilitation after facilitation. I've done things along the lines of, we used to call them zones. Like I've had trainings in all types of EDI spaces, from religion to accessibility. And I think just having a passion for the work was my entry into it. And I say that very lightly because I think since EDI is such a hot topic, there might need to be more conversation around those who we do let do this practice, because so many of us are passionate about it. But we have to make sure that our passion kind of aligns with these different organizations and making sure that we can be sustainable in the work. But I think my time on that college campus just taught me, because it is this epic place of learning. And the number one thing I learned was in that residence life space, and it was that people connection. So when I think of EDI, I think about that belonging piece, and that's kind of what's been my window into this space.
I love that.
I feel like that was so well said, and I want to be able to say ditto instead of whatever it is that I wrote for myself. Like I like what Chloe said. But yeah, in the early 2000s, oh gosh, I feel like I say these things and it just starts to add age as I speak, right? In the early 2000s, I started doing work with organizations, really sort of doing capacity building work as it related to working particularly with nonprofit arts institutions. really helping them think about inclusion, thinking about diversity. I am from Miami, Florida, and one of the things I like to say about Miami is that we're a really diverse area that has a huge diversity issue, right? So spending a lot of time in a place that really, really had to dig into understanding what diversity was, recognizing that just because we're diverse doesn't mean we're inclusive, or even sort of recognizing what people's differences are because we're so used to saying everyone is different. So in the early 2000s, I started doing that work. I'm going to say around 2012, I started working particularly with theater organizations, and a group of us got together and said, what if we start thinking, what does our community need to do to be able to host the TCG conference? Like, let's use that as our primer. If we were going to host TCG here, what's the work that we haven't been thinking about? And that it just became resoundingly clear that it was really related to doing D&I work. And so I really started leaning into working specifically within our theater community or with our performing arts communities about doing D&I work. In 2015, Carmen Morgan founded the Art Equity started doing their National Facilitator Training Program. And so I was in the inaugural cohort of that program, which was really brilliant to get to work with leaders from all over the country, really thinking about how do we lead our organizations and communities doing D&I work, but really, really digging in for folks who have these deeper commitments. And so over the years, been parts of lots of cohorts, lots of training work, but also, like Chloe said, a lot of my lived experience has also been a great primer for being in these spaces. For me, there was a lot of the work in terms of being the only person who looked like me in a lot of the rooms that I was walking into. So how do we learn how to navigate in those spaces? And do we possess, because not everybody does, language that helps folks recognize how our differences need to make us maybe come into those spaces with a level of empathy that perhaps we haven't thought of before. So considering myself a lifelong learner, that training, I think, always continues. I have done formalized work, but I have also lived this life for quite some time and been blessed enough to be in the spaces where I've also been able to sort of share that. And as an educator, it's been part of my trajectory to share that with others.
So how did I get to this role? I was an actor. I went to the University of Miami. We got some canes over here. And I came to New York, right? Like you do. And I started pounding the pavement. The thing that I discovered, right, as I was going along and I was rising to higher echelons in the industry, is that the audiences that I was able to serve looked less and less like the community that made me an artist over time, which is really disappointing. I also came from a cultural space. I grew up in Oakland, California, but I came up in very, very privileged circles where we, tend to think in terms of like noblesse oblige and talented 10th. And so just what has been ingrained in me from a young age is to use your access and your privilege to look out for your community, especially because it is so systemically marginalized. And so I thought, well, 30s are on the corner and I'd like something more steady and I don't like the outcomes that I'm seeing on the stage. What can I do to have a lasting impact on the way this business treats what I would call its most important assets, its stage performers, especially those with marginalized identities. So I thought that my foray into that would be through sociology, which is very much a lens that I see this work through. But as I dug deeper, I got some really great advice from a professor at NYU who said, we've done this work, right? The research is available. You have to go into the business spaces and convince them to apply it. So I did an MBA at the Fordham Gabelli School of Business with my eyes set on HR and particularly people operations in artistic spaces. In the time that I was there, I was the inaugural fellow for diversity and inclusion at Gabelli. So that started me down a road of qualitative and quantitative research that I'm really excited by. Just as I was finishing at Gabelli, I came on staff at Actors Equity. And I'm a glutton for punishment, so I'm now an evening law student at Fordham Law, focusing on entertainment and labor and employment. So the way that my viewpoint into this work is expanding now balances the law, to which we are all accountable and which has the final say, particularly in employment decisions, and critical race theory. How would that law be different if it were built and designed by the people that this society keeps out? So that's my journey to the work. It's got a sociology lens and an HR lens and business strategy and legal, but I have never once sat in a particularly EDI training, leadership focused learning opportunity. And I look forward to doing it, but that's how I come to the work.
Before we go much further, I do want to talk about, can you, I guess in layman's terms, describe kind of critical race theory in the terms of what it means to your work? Because I know that tends to be kind of a scary term for a certain population of people. So if we can just kind of, if you don't mind expanding a little bit on that.
Sure. I think I would say that critical race theory is just a means of exploration, right? It explores the legal systems that we have in place and asks, is what we think works in theory, right? Because the law loves to operate in generalities and theories, but not in specifics. Is the thing that we think works in theory actually having the just outcome that we expect it to? And right, that's when you go to your data analysis and you find no, right? In all aspects, in healthcare, in the prison population, in school, right? All of these things that are governed by the law have particularly negative outcomes for marginalized people. So knowing in the particular context that this is not working, how do we look at the specifics to get the outcomes that we want? It uses a lot of things that are generally not particularly, I don't want to say respected, but highly valued in the legal space, right? It uses a lot of storytelling and narrative, which is very profound and sacred, especially in the communities of people of color, people that have oral traditions. And it looks for actual outcomes and the viewpoints of the people who, for some reason, are always on the bottom end of those outcomes, even though that's not the objective of the law in theory, and asks, as I said, how would we do this differently? And particularly, how would the people who are designed to fail in these systems do this differently? Let's give it a shot. It is not, right, about making any particular people feel bad. It's not about, right, turning the tables and making those who are privileged now underfoot. It's just looking at the rules we made through a lens that we don't often, right? Those who are on the outside.
Yes, thank you so much for that.
Sure.
And a question again for all of you. When you took your current roles, did you have a set of goals set in place when you first arrived at your job? And what accomplishments are you most proud of in your current position?
For me personally, my biggest goal was to get to know everyone because I realized very early that you can't come in with your goals and just implement them or place them on top of an organization you know nothing about. So I was very fortunate for in COVID, we had to relaunch our show. So that meant the entire group were back in rehearsal spaces. So I got to be very fortunate to just spend time talking to people during their lunches, just in the hall, like watching them perform. And they were so eager to tell me everything that was going wrong or things that they thought might have fallen in an EDI space from years ago that, if you were here, we would have brought it up 5 years ago, but we're going to bring it up now that you've been here for 5 minutes. And I spent a lot of time, what I would say, putting out small fires before I could even get to the goals conversation. And I think those small fires were what allowed people to see the buy-in of my work because for them, I was just a title. And a lot of people think that we're performative and like, okay, you've hired these people, but what are they actually going to do? But I spent a lot of time letting them get to know Chloe and like my heart and why I wanted to help. Um, and I also spent a lot of time with our HR consultants, KK Reset, and I just listened to some of the issues that came up in when people started to report to them. And that's when I started to kind of draft my goals. And a lot of it is around conflict mediation, leadership and management training, because we often give people positions because they're stellar at something. And then we also give them a team underneath them. But just because you're stellar at hair doesn't mean you're stellar at supervision. So I'm very fortunate to say we're spending a lot of time on management training and then also just removing the fear around my position and the work that we're doing because I think I run up against a lot of people who would handle an issue a certain way, but now that HR and EDI exist, they have lost their confidence of handling an issue because they're concerned about getting canceled or it being something more bigger. And I spend a lot of time reminding them that regardless of race, religion, creed, if you're equitable and if you're consistent in how you handle a situation, it doesn't matter if you're talking to a Black person or a queer person. So it's just giving people confidence to know that we're here not to say you're in trouble, but we're here to guide you through the navigation of trying to now implement all this change that we have now said that we're going to do. Um, and another thing that I am really excited about is just opening access to the global majority, people who never knew that there was a position. I'm Chloe Beck from Cleveland, Ohio. I never knew that one day I could be on Broadway and not on a stage. So just creating spaces for people to see that while you might see 30 people on a stage, it takes 300 to 1,000 to get us to that curtain call. And now being able to say you can be in this position even though you don't have someone tapping you through nepotism or you have a skill that's adjacent. Like if you can braid my hair in this location, we probably can use you in the hair room in some way. So just trying to create that access and retention. And my biggest goal within those two spaces is I will never feel comfortable like you all haven't heard it yet. I think these two have. The way I talk about my show and the way I love my show, I struggle being the voice and the face of this and saying, hey, come work here. And then I place you in a department where we haven't trained people to accept you and welcome you. So I spend a lot of time in that bubble of getting people here and making sure they're safe and secure and they belong here, and also equipping people to make sure that they're doing their job and they're not offensive, or none of us need to get canceled if we're open to an honest conversation. So I spend a lot of time calling us into that space.
I think what I want to say is that it was really innovative to think up a position like this. It was really kind of exciting when I saw a prospectus about a director of social responsibility and what does that mean? And it's kind of a lot to say in a title. So what do you really mean by that? And for myself, coming into something that didn't exist before and being someone who's from the world of changing the world, I'm a nonprofit educator through and through. We're going to change the world. And every time you see a light bulb go off, boom, the world is changing. Look, we're doing this thing. Right? I've been that person for many years, and it's been great. So coming into a space where there was lots of language, but not necessarily anything already in place, meant that I sort of shifted my approach. And then when I came in, my initial goals were those of my employers. I came in going, let's do these things they want to do. But also with the lens of the consultant that I've been for years going, let's see what's actually here. So how can I bridge doing an assessment with what you want to see? And how can I help us figure out the language that we can share together in the best ways to move forward in doing the work. And I think in D&I spaces, it's a lot of the challenge that many of us will find, that by the time people are ready to reach out to someone like me and say, let's do the work, while they may not actually know what the work is, and that there's a whole lot of the work that happens before you can get to this training or before we get to, right? There's a whole lot of priming work that has to be done. And so really coming in and figuring out how can I align with what we want to get done and help us create a path to get to those places. And I think it's been a really sort of brilliant journey that way. And as I spoke about earlier, I'm such a community person that one of the big things that I wanted us to be in language about together was shifting the narrative from this idea of family to community. Some of the ways that over the years, Broadway holding this family community has actually led to greater hurts for the people in these spaces. And so really helping us shift to using this language of community and just how robust things can still be using this community language. So that's a lot of what I'm excited about. I don't know that I'm going to hold the term proud, but I'm excited about seeing evolution as we move closer to that. And an initiative that I'm excited about is that, at least in our space, I have been able to invite folks into, now we have a process of doing exit interviews or exit conversations. And I think especially because this is a show that's been around, this is year 19 for this show, there are people, last year we had someone leave who had been with the show for 18 years as one of the cast members. So thinking about the wealth of knowledge that anyone has, whether you're in the space for a month or you're there for 18 years, and helping people start to recognize just how important their voices are. And that even if you've never had a conversation with management before, there are people who care about what you're experiencing and want to figure out how that can inform us making this an even better experience for someone else who comes in. So really creating that process and helping folks. And so they all get the email and it says voluntary, you don't have to do this, but I would love to talk to you. And Chloe has heard me use this motto before. My motto is, if we meetin', we eatin'. So I love to tell people, like, let's find a way to get together, to break bread, and really just have a candid conversation. I'm not going to show up with a notepad. I really just want to share space with you and hear that I'm not looking for the awful things, but like Chloe said, that's exactly what folks think generally when they meet me, that I'm showing up to hear the bad things. I care as much about the bad things as I do the good things. I really just want to be in this space and help you know that you've got a whole group of people who cared enough to bring someone like me in so that you know that we care about you, the person, as well as you, the performer. So I think that's what I'll say. I hope that I sort of answered your question.
Yes, no, I love that. And I am notorious for booking meetings during restaurant week.
Nice.
Bliss.
Oh gosh. So I am not the first person to hold this seat at Actors Equity. Nicole Smart held this position before I did. So when I came in, there was a lot of stuff going on already, right? There were a lot of things that were established. So I spent a good chunk of time, easily the first 6 months, at getting to know, based on what Actors Equity had already implemented in its diversity department, what are this place's priorities, right? Which sometimes are not exactly the same as the stated priorities, but like what you do tells me what's valuable to you. And can I bridge the gap between those two things? If there is a gap, there was a gap. Because we had focused very much on the affinity spaces, right? On events, commemorative things like that, but hadn't focused on deep change, right? Within individuals and within the organization. So I spent the first year like carrying those things forward and identifying the right relationships. But in the summer of 2020, and in all of the like painful, chaotic, tumultuous things that were happening in that time. I saw the right opportunity to implement something that was more holistic, right, and more about long-term change and more about difficult conversations. So we held a town hall and welcomed members to a 3-hour conversation to speak to our executive director and our president about their experiences, particularly of anti-Black bias in the industry, whether that be at work or in their interactions with the union. And I listened and took furious notes, copious notes, and then invited members to send an email. If you have more to say, send it. And upwards of 500 emails came in. And I knew, right, that the organization overall would understand this as a good opportunity to, right, like air the feelings, to be heard. But I saw it as a good opportunity to start collecting that qualitative data. And I read and responded to every single one of 500 and something emails. And what that showed me was 8 major areas that our members, that our staff, that prospective members have concerns with. And out of that came what we call the diversity and inclusion retrofit. They are the 8 areas in which we take a really deep dive. A working group of my own, like, devising comes together to explore what have we been doing historically with whatever the topic may be. How could that be informed by best practices? What knowledge can we pull from other industries? And how can we best adjust what we have in front of us, right, within the bounds of labor law, to be more inclusive given those concerns. So the place that we started, because I always think it's important to look in the mirror first, was with who is Actors Equity as an employer. In terms of developing staff, which is what we call that pillar, are we doing everything we can in a traditional human resources, people operations sense to make our staff, right, the people who like crank the wheels and have boots on the ground every day, feel whole and uplifted and heard and treated respectfully, and an integral part of the team. So we've made enormous changes on that front in terms of how we recruit, how we hire, how we develop staff, how we hear from them regularly and implement feedback. And another big change, a big pillar out of the retrofit that I'm very proud of is open access, right? Having a look at our pathways to membership and considering that though this may seem fair, it may seem equal in theory, what do the outcomes look like? What's the demographic balance of our membership? And how is there perhaps some bias along the road to becoming a member that creates such drastic differences in representation? And how do we remove our complicitness in that, right? How do we pluck that piece out? How do we create a pathway to membership that is in the hands of the actor or stage manager? And it's had impressive outcomes in that those who have joined via open access, right, as a body, have a higher representation of people of color, higher representation of people who are comfortable identifying themselves as disabled than our membership at large. So I'm excited about the retrofit overall. It's going to take us years to get through all 8 pillars. And we're going to have to keep iterating, right? Because our sense of what is just in the society is going to change over time. And I hope that that is building a habit in all parts of the organization to ask these kinds of questions as we think through what has been and whether that supports our goals and what can be. You know, how inclusive is the world that we can dream up, and how do we make that into a system and a strategy that's measurable?
Yeah. um, you all work for fairly large organizations and shows, but do you have any advice for smaller theater companies or productions that may not necessarily have the budget to hire someone full-time or even part-time? What they may be able to do as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion?
For me, something that I even do, even though I have this large organization, is I spend a lot of time where free opportunities exist. I think there have been some TED Talks that have been extremely transformative for my work in the ways in which I view it, and that's free. I think something that also was super helpful for me during that 2020 lockdown, my organization had a LinkedIn subscription for LinkedIn Learning. While you might not be able to have a salary for a whole person, you can buy that subscription and give access to one or two people. And you can really sit through those trainings and then build one that would make sense for your organization. I think something I hopefully can speak for my EDI colleagues is that while some organizations might be siloed and companies might be siloed in the EDI work, we are very community based, and we help, we reach out, we tap each other, and maybe reaching out to some of those companies that do have an EDI person, if it's not a contractual thing, and say, hey, you all are presenting on something. Can we zoom in for a fee? Because anytime you're asking people to do the work, pay them. I have to say that again, pay them and pay them. But there are so many, like I love media, movies, documentaries, things that you can just say, these are devos that I think would benefit us to look at as a company. Let's do a brown bag lunch. Let's do something where we just talk through it. You don't really need a person in this position to still do the work. And something that I also have learned very quickly is that even though you don't have an EDI person, there's so many people who are invested in this work, who are passionate about it, who while they might do pirouettes on stage, they're also doing grassroots things behind the scenes, including them and asking them, and also asking what their resources are and ways in which they've gotten so invested in the work. You know, it's nothing to say, hey, I can't pay you to be full time, but will you come in and do this session for insert this amount of money? And I think we can all find ways around it. You know, as somebody who's sitting in my seat, I am still trying to do that because, like we've all said on this call, it is so vast. I cannot be everywhere. So now I'm going to start researching. And hey, Christina, you're great at this. Can we bring you in to do this training? Hey, I can come talk to you about that. We also are working to do some universal trainings anyway. So I think it's something that we can just do. There's so much free content. I think Bliss said it. The work has already been done. All you have to do is a quick Google, and any topic that you want, you can probably find 13 amazing interviews, videos, resources. Share it out.
I get to say it this time. Ditto. Yes. But I'm going to say yes and. So all of those awesome things that Chloe said. But here's what I tell every organization. Your budget reflects your priorities. So whether you are a large or a small institution, saying that there is $0 available is telling in some ways also. I am not, so for one, I know consulting firms that have sliding scale fees. Because, like Chloe said, many of us are committed to the work, and we haven't necessarily put ourselves in the brain space of how do I get rich from doing it, right? So I think there's a world that exists where if what you need is a resource, resources are available. I want to offer that when smaller institutions cannot hire a full-time person or can't hire somebody, identifying who is going to be the lead for the organization to do the work is incredibly important. Because another phrase that I use very often is, we will WebMD ourselves into our D&I work in ways that works really to the detriment of moving the work forward, right? We've all had, well, I can't say we've all, but I imagine many of us have had the experience of using WebMD. I can't tell you the awful things I've given myself from reading symptoms and feeling like I know, kind of like I watch enough procedural doctor shows that I understand how to diagnose myself. That is sometimes what happens in this work. And it's really important that we just identify who's going to lead, whether they are going to get information from other people or if they're going to reach out to a consultant, but especially in a smaller organization, identify where that's going to be spearheaded. It's really important that we have a focal point when we're doing the work, because in these spaces, there are so many voices, and I love just how empowering it has been for folks during the shutdown to educate themselves. So there's going to be a lot of people potentially who are going to come in who know something about something, right? So making sure that we still have identified where's the focal point, who's going to be leading this for us. That doesn't mean they have to have the most knowledge, but it does mean that we're going to respect whatever that choice is, that person is going to help us move through making all of these choices, right? I think that's incredibly important. And if you can't afford somebody, most consultations are free. So I'm going to throw that out with my shoulder to the side, just like I did. Most consultations are free. So you can at least have an initial conversation that helps you along the path to making choices. Is it the TED Talk? Is it we're going to have a book group? What is the way that we're going to move our folks forward? And every organization really needs to think this way. To what end are we committed to doing the work? It's really important because I have worked with institutions that have gone far beyond the scope of the actual work they do because their constituents needed to understand for their personal growth. Really recognize that we're not going to be able to cover everything. So what is it that we are committed to addressing as we move the work forward, especially when you don't have somebody there full time?
Christina beat me to the yes and, but I'll say, and one more thing. Just as your budget reflects your priorities, it's like the way we track and measure currency, the way we track and measure the budget is an indication of how valuable it is to us, right? If you accidentally order an Apple TV movie on your company card, you will get a call within 3 weeks about that $2.99 that you misspent, right? We track and measure things that we want to grow, things that we value. So if you are not measuring a baseline, right, and tracking intermittently every 6 months, every year, not only the quant in terms of representation, but what's the feedback in employee engagement surveys? What's the feedback from those optional exit interviews? If you're not measuring the thing very specifically so that you can make a comparison year over year, it doesn't really matter to you, right? And so the question is, are you going to treat diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging like money that you value and want to grow and treat very preciously, or are you going to treat it like change in the couch cushions, right? That's a choice that you can make. And so I guess I would say to any employer, any organization, regardless of your size, you should have the information that allows you to quantify at least how you're doing in terms of representation and diversity. And it doesn't take much more than like a free Google form to know how to start measuring that year over year and holding yourself accountable to growth, right? You have to define what growth means. This is not a world where we operate in quotas, but we know what the difference between what the society that you operate in looks like and what perhaps your staff overall, your team overall, your programming overall looks like, and how to bring those things a little bit more into alignment, right? So if it's valuable, let's do better than changing the couch cushions.
Yes, let's do that. We are kind of winding down on time, unfortunately, but I'm going to try to throw in one, maybe two questions in if we can. We talked a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, as that is the scope of the conversation that we are here for. But to add a little bit more levity into the conversation, I am very curious about what show turned you into a theater lover yourself. And don't say your
ironically,
own show.
oh, truth, beauty, freedom, love, Moulin Rouge. I'm not going to say it. To be fully transparent, ironically enough, my freshman year of college, I had an RA which is a resident assistant. She was obsessed with musicals and show tunes. And I will be honest, the first thing that she had me like actually sit down and watch was Rent the movie. And I was like, oh my God, I need to see Rent on Broadway. And she's like, it's been gone for however many years. And then when it came back, I was financially not mature and couldn't get here. So I'm still thinking Rent the revival's coming back. But outside of Rent the movie, I got to see Lion King. I think I had a teacher who took me in middle school, and they came to the Playhouse in Cleveland, Ohio. And that was the first time I saw interactive theater, like when those giraffes came through the aisle. And then I got to see that same play again, or that same show again at the Fox in Atlanta. And it had changed a little bit. I was like, wait, this story is getting spicy. So, like, just even the ways in which that they keep it going. I personally have not seen it on Broadway yet because I'm trying to save it for a rainy day. But seeing The Lion King and seeing the artistry and seeing so many faces that looked like mine, that's when I realized that Broadway actually is this expansive space and people of color can be stars of it. And then, of course, when The Color Purple opened here with Cynthia Erivo, I took all my students at NYU on that NYU dollar. And I knew Broadway was going to be mine. I just didn't know how. And then I fell in love with Moulin Rouge, the musical. So here we are.
Well, the show that turned me in. So let's be clear. I've been performing since I was 3. So when I played Barabbas in the church Passion play, I was in. But in middle school, it was Phantom of the Opera. And I knew nothing about sound. I knew nothing about speakers. So when it sounded like the Phantom was right next to my head and he was somehow whispering in my ear and really it was just the sound panned to one side or the other, I was in. I don't know how he did it. How did he get there that fast? It was done. It was done. I've been in love with theater. And I've been in love with theater from a very young age and have been performing my whole life. So it's been something that's been part of my story forever. And I'm such a storyteller that I've been in love with theater since then. And I got to see The Color Purple with LaShawne's and the original cast. And I remembered how important it was community-wise that show existed. And when I walked into the theater and everybody was dressed up like they had either just left church or they were on the way to church, like everyone was dressed for that production. And I just remembered how important having access for the community also was. So that's what show theater and we love each other.
Oh gosh. So I was a baby ballerina. I came up in the Oakland Ballet Company and a diehard summer camper. So I would go to camp at Idlewild Arts. And my first taste of jazz was under Denon and Sabre Rawls, and we focused on Fosse that summer. And I was like, oh, this man loves me, right? Like this choreography makes sense to me. And it had never occurred to me that like I could be using my voice also to tell the story. Like this is magical. So, you know, anything that Mr. Bob Fosse ever made totally just like lights my fire all day, every day. And as I came up and like found my interest in musical theater, right? I found myself settling into like finding a nice niche into more cerebral stories, more stories that grapple with really difficult subject matter, especially in terms of identity, right? So anytime there's a tight two-hander that makes us question everything that we thought, it does it for me. Disgraced actually is one of my favorites by Ayad Akhtar. And that question of how our identity to other people can be very different from what it is to us, and how work and life are not always, there's not a clean line between them. How do you deal with the fact that your identity shows up very differently in different spaces? So I definitely started totally in love with Chicago, and skipped class to go see the filming of Rent in high school, filming of Rent. But eventually, it turns out that I'm just a person that really loves a quiet play. So let me know when you need a date. We'll talk afterwards. I know that they're not always the most shiny, but I love that introspection.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And in closing, is there any final advice or information that you would like to impart to those watching?
For me personally, I think the number one thing that always comes up, and it's something that we've been threading across our company, in the spaces of EDI, we need to all have this other word. I know it's equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, but it needs to be equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, and grace. We all need to give ourselves grace. We need to give each other grace. I always say, we didn't learn how to walk at the same time, talk at the same time. Some of us still don't know how to ride a bike. So for some of us who's had this EDI space that's lived, for some of us, they didn't ever know they needed to know it until George Floyd was murdered. So I think all of these spaces, all these people are in the same room and we're trying to have a foundational conversation. So as long as we give each other grace to know when someone's actively trying to learn versus someone who's actively trying to be offensive, and just knowing that there's still some gray as we try to navigate this space together.
I would say when we think about EDI, I want to add in not just inclusion, but intentionality to that I. It's one of the things that I think, particularly as an industry, we've struggled with, because for many of us, we've said, there's a vibe. It just feels this way. It feels good. Or, when I'm in the room, there's just a way people feel when they're around me. This is great. And we've got to be intentional about what are those things we're doing to make people feel welcome. Do we know what the things are that we're doing when people are not feeling welcome? So, to Bliss's point, Google Sheets is a really simple way of thinking about creating something like, or you could use Google Forms and create an informal, anonymous survey that people could get the feedback, hear from the people who you think keep your business going. And that's everybody. That's every stakeholder. Listen to what they're saying, invite their words so that you can really inform how we can be intentional about making theater. And I've said this from the day I got hired, right? That we've always said theater was this incredibly welcoming place. It's our job now to do what we have to make it the place we've always said that it was, because now we know it hasn't been. So let's do the work. Let's have the conversations. If you don't want someone to tell you face to face, that's okay. Do the survey. Just get the data so that we can figure out what we can be doing, because it's such a place that welcomes so many people. The things that we talk about, the different skills that people have that are so integral to making this work. Find out so we can keep doing the work. And if you need help, ask. Do not WebMD.
Oh, I think I would say that this work is personal. It is deeply personal, right? In an organization, your organization is a community. It's a collective of people, and it reflects your stuff, right? So very often, a person can come to the table thinking like, well, we're thinking about this institution. It's not me. It's you. It's personal. You're going to learn things about yourself that are difficult, and that's okay. But you're going to learn things about yourself in the overcoming and the implementation that are wonderful and inspiring, right? So be ready for the fact that this work comes home with you at night in your heart, right? And you have to make space and allow the challenge. And also, make space for the self-care that lets you come back to it every day, right? Because we must come back to it every day. We cannot be the wonderful, inclusive industry that we thought we were if you don't prepare yourself to keep coming back, even when it's challenging. So that's what I'd say. And also, if you're an audience member, ask the questions when you buy your ticket. Ask, right? Just like you want to buy from Black-owned businesses in February, you know, buy from women-owned businesses in March. Ask about, like, where does the money run up to? And what is this organization doing to make itself inclusive? As you come and invest your hard-earned dollar in the experience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Bliss, so much for being here today to join this conversation and for the work that you're doing. I am so privileged to be here moderating this conversation. I've learned so much, and I hope you watching have learned just as much as I have. Thank you again to our panelists, and be sure to like if you're on Facebook and subscribe if you are on YouTube. Thank you, TDF fans.